Today I'd like to talk to you in regards to flipping your classroom. And we're going to go over a little bit about the technology behind it and the history of flipping a classroom. Traditionally, in the past, since school was conceived probably, the traditional classroom was a bunch of students sitting in desks while the teacher stood in front of the class giving his or her lecture, writing information on the board, and students having to take down all the lecture notes. And then they would get this big pile of homework where they were to go and implement what they learned in the lesson and apply it to their homework. This is what occurred in all grade levels across, from kindergarten to 12th grade on and through college. And the students were to sit there very attentively and take notes and absorb everything that the teacher had to say. And of course, they did it silently as well. Change needed to occur. Students, it just is kind of boring. So very acclaimed teachers, Jonathan Bergman and Aaron Sams, who had they won several prizes, awards, being traditional, quote unquote, teachers in the field of science. And they realized that something needed to change. And so they had actually been working in their garages and found a way that they could record PowerPoint presentations. They originally started to do this process of recording in order to aid in the students who were absent. So if they were absent, they would be able to listen to the lecture, so to speak, so they could get caught up on their homework. And this whole idea behind this caught on. The idea of online lectures began to spread. Teachers were just enthralled with it. It's like, wow, this is great. Now the kids who are absent and can't be in school are able to not miss out, and they didn't have to do as much, quote unquote, catching up. Then they had this idea. How about if we reverse the roles of, instead of students coming to class, hearing a lecture, and then going home and trying to implement what they heard in the lecture at home, interacting with their homework at home with no guidance, because how many parents understand, quote unquote, new math, or they would try to get peers to help, and if none of that occurred, they would just get frustrated and just not do it. Here is Jonathan Bergman. He is speaking about the idea and the concept behind flipping a classroom.
When I was in school, if I wanted information, there were 3 places I could access it. Number 1, in the heads of my teachers. Number 2, in the textbooks. And number 3, in the libraries. Many years later, so I would say, but 10 years ago, they gave me one of these projector things. And you know what I could do? I could do a PowerPoint. I thought I'd arrived. Man, this is perfect. I can do all this stuff. But you know what? I was still the center of the classroom. The way you learned is you walked into my classroom and you learned from John. Standing up and doing his thing, right? That's how my classroom looked. And right now, I think we're in this very exciting time of change. As the superintendent just said, this is a totally different world, right? I think we're moving from this classroom, that teacher-centered classroom, that really, in many ways, still doesn't look a whole lot like this picture, to this active, engaged, problem-centered, challenge-based. I sat on a challenge-based session this morning or this afternoon. That was great. Inquiry-driven classroom of the future. We need to move away from this. And it's happening. And I know many of you are doing it. The key, the flipped classroom, I think, is this word. It's personalization. It allows you to personalize the learning for each individual kid. I think we should have an IEP for every kid, without the paperwork, though. Well, let's think about Bloom's taxonomy. Now, we've got 2 pictures of Bloom's taxonomy. Implicit in Bloom's taxonomy, if you think about it, is time. The area of that triangle, the one on the left, is that you spend most of your time in remembering and understanding. And now let's be honest, folks. The videos, all they're good for is the bottom 2 tiers of Bloom's. That's it. But what do we spend most of our time in our class on? Are the bottom 2 tiers of Bloom's. And we hope that somehow we can climb up and do some application analysis and maybe someday create. What I think we need to do is we need to move to the right screen, if you will, when you flip Bloom's taxonomy. And when you flip Bloom's taxonomy, you spend more time in the upper level topics. As some people like to say, the hot topics, right? The higher order thinking topics. And then less time in class on the lower order things. So it rethinks the entire pedagogy when you flip your learning. It's like flipping Bloom's taxonomy. Let's say that you have a traditional teacher, which by the way was me. For 19 years, I was a stand and deliver lecture teacher. I think it was pretty good, but I was still just teaching in the traditional way. And then way over there, like I say, where Aaron's at, is teaching nirvana. Okay? And I have to cross the river, use the metaphor of a river. And the problem is that maybe I can't swim. How do I get there? How do I get to that place where it's really the great teaching nirvana? I think the answer is you take one step at a time. We believe that a good education, regardless of whether you flip the class or not, it's all about relationships. What we have forgotten in the dialogue about education is that teaching is an art, and it starts with a relationship between the teacher and the student. That is the key. I think schools are going to look dramatically different in the next 10 to 15 years. But how do we get there? I think flipping has a lot to answer that. Our learning, I was interviewing some 8th graders yesterday at our school and asking them to sort of dream what would school look like. And almost to a person, they didn't quite say it this way, they couldn't articulate it, but what they were telling me was, I want to be able to choose what I want to learn. Sherry Kendrick, a teacher in San Antonio, adopted this model. She says, you know what I love about this model? I don't have to go to school every day and perform 5 times a day. I get to go to school and interact with kids. Teaching is about the relationship between the teacher and the student. And if we can maximize that relationship, if there's anything that we can do, if we can even harness technology to do that, that is a very powerful thing.
So, flipping the classroom all started from the idea of providing videos for absent students. Then they had this idea of completely flipping it all together. Teachers began using the videos and the podcast to teach their students outside the class time, and then they would go home with their homework of listening to the lectures and then taking notes and writing things down of what they understood or did not understand, taking that back into the classroom where they would work collaboratively in through the journey of the lesson, and where the teacher would be able to aid the students in whichever way of their learning is best, whether it's audio, visual, or kinesthetically. I really like what Mr. Bergman said about every student having an IEP without, of course, the paperwork. This way is the best way for every student to learn. Creating a flipped classroom equals success for all students, for all styles of learning. So basically, we need to start flipping.